Good afternoon. It is Sunday, January 28th, and this is Archetypal Hour. And I'm here joined currently live with Hoda and Lexi. Maybe some others will join us. And whatever archetypes feel like wanting to be present and make themselves known and expressed through our unique perspectives and identities and channels. Um, for those that have never joined this space, who might be listening asynchronously, this is just a place where we talk about archetypes, which can be really form, shapes, patterns of energetic resonance, of symbol, of sort of potent content of the imaginal world, and how they might be present in our field, and how we might call upon the archetypes to maybe offer us new ways of looking at things, adding different perspectives, or maybe help embodying certain energies that we want to see more of. Or perhaps sort of reconciling and helping archetypes, helping us do some healing work around particular aspects of ourselves, um, or aspects of, other kinds of things going on within us, whether that's sort of with generational or ancestral trauma or drama or stuff that's happening in the collective or just stuff that's happening within us. Um, or it could just be a way of us more uh being drawn to just the wonderful, unique, infinite facets of life, of reality, of the goddess, of however you want to sort of conceptualize all that is, or at least all that we sort of um, have access to in our current forms and enjoying this world on Earth, this life on Earth. So one of the archetypes that I asked in the chat that came up, and so we might start here. That's been in the field has been the Pleiades. And so I'm going to read what came out for like just loose context. So this is the Pleiades in Greek mythology. Writers in antiquity would talk of seven Pleiades, mountain nymphs, thought to inhabit ancient Greece. The seven Pleiades were the daughters of the Titan Atlas, and where a mother is named, they were the offspring of the Oceanid Cleone. Atlas was well known for his beautiful offspring, and so the Pleiades were sisters to the Hesperides, the Hyades, and the Hyas. The names of the seven Pleiades were generally agreed up by ancient sources, with the seven sisters being Maya, Electra, Taygete, Alcone, Stellano, Sterope, and Merope. I'm probably doing a horrible job pronouncing those. That's great. And then some just Lexi shared some more astrophysics components of it. They are known as Messier 45 and other names by different cultures. It's an astrum in an open star cluster containing middle-aged hot B-type stars in the northwest of the constellation Taurus. At a distance of about 440 light years, it is among the nearest star clusters to Earth. Beautiful. And I would love to make space for folks to come off mute or to share more. The first, I have to admit that the Pleiades is really the middle-aged stars is a hilarious concept. So it is kind of funny. Like they're sort of placing them in their maturation. Like, yeah, and if you, I don't know why, I always think of like stars as related to logos somehow. Like I don't know, maybe that's just some of, like, holdover from some of the Christian lineage. Same for you too, Hoda. But it's like at middle age, maybe they're really starting to, like, question their logos. Like, "Huh, am I seeing this?" Like, I don't know, if I was a star, I imagine at middle age, I would start being like, "Okay, is there more to this? Have I reached the sort of peak of this particular perspective or point of view? And is it time to reevaluate? Like do they have a midlife crisis? Stars have midlife crises. Being jokey here, but also being serious. What does that look like? Otis says, I think yes. I think so too. I think so too. I don't know what soul would be considered, what our own sun in terms of age. That might be a question for another container. Are they, like, in their 30s, or where are they at right now? I'm kind of curious, finding myself curious. But back to the I feel like souls going through their teenage phase. I mean, that would not shock me. That would not shock me if our own star is kind of more like in their adolescence. I could definitely see that. That would actually explain a lot. So I'm gonna sit with that for a second. Um, but the Pleiades, yeah, like, and I know there's a lot of amazing Native American lore, especially around the Pleiades, and some of those tribes and lineages have really strong roots with the Pleiades. I would say one of the ones that comes to mind for me, I think I've shared it in other places before, but Karthikeya, Shiv, well, in most lineages, it's like a son of Shiva. Um, he he was raised by the Pleiades in that sort of lineage where he grew extra heads just to get breastfed by the other sisters, by the other stars. Um, and it's also Kritika, like the nakshatra Kritika is part of this, where it's related to the Pleiades. Um, and that is it's a sun ruled nakshatra. And its symbol is the knife, and the deity is Agni, the fire deity in the Vedic tradition. But that yeah, so that Pleiades kind of in that tradition, Kartikeya, they have a that nakshatra has a lot to do with like sort of, I don't know, like there's a cutting, a sharp, a solar, like it's not an easy energy, at least in that tradition. But it's one that's really good at separating bullshit from truth. Um, but yeah, in that tradition, like I think they needed the gods really needed they wanted Shiva to offer up a scion, some sperm, some seed to help create something strong enough to fight this demon. And so he starts him and Pavarti, they're having sex, and it's taking too long. And the gods are like, what is happening? And I forget how they do it, so I apologize for butchering this lore. But somehow they get him to spill his seed, and they try to find someone to carry the baby to term, but it's too damn hot. Like it just requires all this extra. They give it to Agni, Gaia, and so like there's this sort of, and then this child finally comes, and so there's sort of like in that lore, there's sort of like shared lineage with Earth, with Agni, with fire, with Shiva, all, and then with the Pleiades, all having these roles in rearing this energy, which is often associated with the planet Mars, also with Mangala. Um, so I don't know. That's what real little lore I know about the Pleiades, and I'm really curious how, yeah, if you're willing to share anyone else about sort of some of the lore that has really interested you or you've come across on the Pleiades that might actually feel like Hoda, you mentioned it was kind of coming up for you. I'm curious what aspects or what pieces of that Pleiades, the sisters especially. So it sounds like the archetypes, the sisters, are what coming up. Yeah. So anything more you'd love to share? I'd love to hear it.
Absolutely. And thank you too for that delineation, Adam. I feel like it helped me like put pieces together. And I really, I guess the reference point that I have regarding the myth of the Pleiades and the way that that story unfolds, like astrally speaking, relates to a text. I think I've shared it in the room by an author named Amora Kwanyin, who wrote a text called The Pleiadian Perspective on Human Evolution. And it just kind of speaks to a really interesting staccato of consciousness ripening on Earth. And so for me, it kind of just also inspires me to read about the Vedic literature so that I can maybe like put some of the pieces together. But it feels also like related to some of the um, like energy work that I've been doing with myself regarding um, yeah, like sisterhood and like nurturing some of those connections, not only with my own sisters, but just the concept of how different aspects of the goddess can like mix and mingle and interact with one another, even if it isn't through specifically like female to like female oriented friendships or relationships, and how that kind of ripples out, how those connections and those threads and what weaves them or unweaves them, and how they relate to this sort of, yeah, this logos of, I guess you can say, like sisterhood, that again isn't just related to female friendships, because I also feel like I'm realizing just in my own personal life, like how I have sisterhood type of connections with males as well, or like other like folks who are like non-binary. And I'm like, oh, like these are very interesting and juicy like relational connections. So, you know me, I'm always like, okay, let me take this to the galactic stage and see how this works from like a vaster perspective, and relate that to the interpersonal microcosmic level. So yeah, thanks for listening, y'all.
Wow. Thank you. That's really interesting. Yeah. It's so fascinating that like this shows up in so many cultures too. This particular like there's so many myths around this in different traditions. So it's really interesting that like yeah, you can really feel that energy around like this cosmic and this sort of consciousness on earth, that it is like something striking about like this energy. Like okay, now I'm gonna go off a little bit, and I really want people to help keep me grounded. But like it, the way you described it, and the way that this shows up in multiple cultures, and the way that the Pleiades are showing up in my social media feed now, which is a ton of people channeling supposedly beings from the Pleiades, it does feel interesting that like this particular asterism is not just interesting for humans, but it almost like the way that humans keep coming to this, it almost feels like it's very purposely like it wants to be very active on Earth consciousness. Um, and I don't know why. From some reason, what you said and like it's all kind of for me. That's what's coming up. Is like this is a constellation. This is a cosmic energy that has some real stakes in Earth and Earth consciousness. And I think some of the natives like have said that that's where like some of Native Americans at least have claimed that like that's where they came from. At least that's what I've read. I can't remember the specific tribes. Um, and it is interesting that like of all the different sort of um uh celestial energies from different star systems on social media, it does feel like people claim channelings from the Pleiades more than other places. Um, yeah. Um, and I don't know. I find that interesting. Um, it's not something that I've sort of engaged with a lot. But I think I've been admitted it in other containers that there's certain parts of like some of the messages that I've seen from people who are say that they're channeling from the Pleiades. There's something about it that has always been like a little bit like I've always kept it a little bit at arm's length. Um, I really don't know why. I'm just gonna be honest. There's like a weird bias there, so I'm like letting it come up to see if it's somehow fruitful. I think I also got like kind of weirded out by the fact that like a lot of the pictures people show of what Pleiadians supposedly look like was like it's very like Norse, like they're like platinum blonde in these AI pictures that people will do, and I'm like, something about this just it's kind of like hitting my spidey senses of like, I don't know. I'm curious about that pipeline of like some of these channeling folks and some of this sort of like eugenic kind of strain in new age thought today, and the fact that they were Nordic looking kind of, I'm not gonna lie, it sort of was like but I'm trying to get over that. I want to let let the Pleiades come, you know, deliver their wisdom, so I don't want to be turned off by some of the things that I see, which might just be, interference, frankly, or maybe it's accurate, like I don't know. Now, Toad, you said that's so key in my opinion. I'm curious what parts of that. Please help ground some of this stuff I'm talking.
Yeah, yeah, no, of course. I'm glad you kind of spoke to that because I do feel like what you said regarding a distorted lens really checks out for me. And then I'm going to plug a little bit of room content here because I'm like, well, there was also an episode where of the Broom Radio podcast where Nobu spoke to um, like how I would just say like people can reach into other people's akashas, which I'm not accusing anyone of or saying that anyone does, but I often think about that strain or that idea when it comes to like these images and the way that I guess the New Age community has gotten their hands on the information of star seeds, um, while the reality that some of these myths have predated what these people channel, and so it does feel like a little bit of a misnomer to say that all Pleiadians look like Norse gods who are beautiful in their own right, but at the same time I'm like, dude, that's not them, in my opinion. And I do appreciate also what you said about the eugenics sort of strain um, that comes up in some people's channelings because I do think that people are going to channel information, whether it's from the cosmos, whether it's from Earth, based on what their body and their field has information of. Like the channeling is, in other words, going to reflect aspects of reality that your subconscious can relate to and grasp. And so for me, I feel like that's why some people that's one reason why I think some people may see these star beings um, as maybe ancestors that they're familiar with. And then there's this also other part of me. I guess this is like the practitioner in me is like maybe they are channeling their ancestors who are like these illustrious, like Norse tall looking gods, I guess you can say. But they're not necessarily Pleiadians and they might be, kind of interlooping information that relates to the Pleiades through virtue of that person's connection to their own ancestry. And so I feel like there's a lot of, basically, like a lot of space for clarity and dissemination to find people who do claim to have and have, verifiable information about channeling beings or different logoses that exist within our universe and exist in our consciousness. Um, so yeah, it's multifaceted for me, and I do think it's an oversight that reflects part of humanity biases that we still need to work through. Because I'll say, even for myself personally, I think it's a very relatable thing. When I first started kind of opening to channel, I saw many of my sky ancestors or my celestial ancestors mirrored by how I understood my earth ancestry to look. So it's not that it inherently makes people bad, but I do think that your spidey senses maybe maybe definitely picking up on something that relates to people's internal biases and internal distortions. Um,
Mm.
yeah,
Thank you.
for
That
sure.
makes so much sense the way you're breaking it down. Yeah, and I think it's that kind of level of nuance that's so important for people to be aware of, because especially those who are like, and I'll put myself in this group in some ways too. Like, I'm only a few years into like some of the more modern spirituality stuff. A lot of what I had been when I first started to get into it was a lot more from like the Christian lineage that I grew up in. So when I branched out, it hasn't been that long, but it's easy to sort of like take people's word for it. You know what I mean? Like without really understanding just the way that, and I like how you're phrasing it, the way that like, yeah, in order for some of these messages to come through, there's just a lot of layers that has to get through, and there's a lot of sort of different ways that this information is relayed in our own conceptual mind, and it's easy to sort of take some of what people are saying they're receiving very literally. I mean, I think that's what I like about this container too in general is like, because I think in the same way with the channeling, like it's helpful to, I think, take messages more archetypally than literally. And I think we still take a lot of these myths and channels and information very literally. Um, and I feel like sometimes that's probably relevant, but a lot of times that's maybe at our significant detriment. Like we're missing a lot of the good, juicy stuff if we're trying to be too literal about everything, and not letting the deeper meaning that's permeated through the archetypal, through the symbolism. Yeah. Coda says for sure, like the ability to play, explore, and discover, in my opinion. Yeah. Yes. Yes. Thank you. Yeah, I think that is really important. And the playing and exploring is an important piece for sure. And I mean, like, I've been thinking about like Dream a lot too, and still have to finish reading this book by Hillman, The Dream and the Underworld. But I keep getting different messages from Dream. Um, and what I love about dreams is that like some of the dream like the people who I really have been gravitating towards lately, this idea of like really allowing the dream to exist on the dream's terms. Um, and I think that's really important because I think we get caught up in like I remember when we were doing like when I do my coaching class where they were teaching dream stuff. And like it's easy, like if you're not used to this sort of world, to be like, well, this dream was so weird, or it doesn't make any damn sense. I was here and then I was there. This person was this person, and then the next second they were a owl or whatever. And it's like, no, they do make sense in the dream. In an archetypal way, it all makes perfect sense. Like, but that is a very different sense of logic and sense than what we're used to in waking life. And I do think that sometimes some of this information that's coming from spirit is maybe better when you think of it in that dreamlike way, where you're like, let the message live on its own terms with its own language, and let's not add a whole lot of shit to it before we get to like just what's the core of what was being said here. Um, but I think I feel like when we start connecting to all these other things and all these things that aren't in the actual message, then then we're just at then we're like getting all these distortions and things. What's the term? Do you want to say more there, Hoda? Because I yes, that we did kind of come full circle to some of the conversation before we started.
Yeah, and I only like realized after I sent the full moon emoji that it's a full moon. But I'm like, yeah, I kind of what you're saying kind of to me relates to like what termas are. It's like what the crux of a transmission can be. And oftentimes the crux of a transmission, I'd like to believe, is is not something that's asking us to go further away from ourselves, but that it's asking kind of like what Lexi said earlier, like how things can be applied, like what is the sliver of truth that resides in every circumstance, and how can the experiential moment branch out from that sliver of truth and the thing, and also weigh to this and measure to the situation, because that's the thing about truth. For it, at least in my opinion, to be true is that it resounds through a myriad of circumstances or applies maybe to many different contexts. And so I feel like it also mirrors yeah, what you were saying. And I'm like, yo, as you were speaking, I'm like, that's a terma. Like, and I don't think that I do actually think that like this container and like playing with archetypes is a way that we can play around with the material to exemplify and further express our exploration in the unseen or in the spiritual.
Mm, yes, thank you. Yes. Yeah, and I think these kinds of things they help us build up our like imaginal literacy. Yeah. I love what you said too about like that sliver of truth and really embodying it. And it feels so connected to the great stuff you were saying last week when we were talking about justice too. It's sort of like the weighing of the truth of who we are and the truth of the situation and finding alignment in these events and how we yeah, and how that is related to like what you had felt into the scales archetype of justice. Um, wow. Yeah. Yeah. And so yeah, so like let's like with this lens, like in most of these traditions, the Pleiades are sisters. In not all of I think almost all of them, there's a sisterhood. I guess the Hindu one, I'm reading this one thing that said that some of them were so they have they were the 6 mothers of the war god Morgan, but there's also another tradition or there's related where they were the wives of the 7 wise rishis, the 7 rishis. And so, like, there's a little bit of, like, a sisterly vibe a little bit in that one, but I would say that one strays. But it looks like the Japanese, the Native American, the Aboriginal, the Greek, they're sisters in all of these. And so, um, yeah, I just want to just like, what do we think archetype of sisters? Like, why is that seemingly like if we were just to take that at its sort of imaginal level, like I think that's what you were kind of speaking to about how for you the sisters were really speaking to like what is this sisterhood. um yeah, but it is interesting that that's feel and how now I'm kind of like wondering like what does sisterhood have to say about consciousness on earth at this moment, kind of connecting back what seemed like was in the air. Well, just because it seemed like yeah, it seemed like there was this connection, but yeah, all right, I'm just gonna sit with that, see what comes up for people. um but specifically like why what about sisters, like this archetype of sisters. Yeah, and then this question, what does sisterhood have to do about consciousness? It's funny, I'm not gonna lie, like, I'm a little bit biased. I have some distortion coming into my field because I've just been, like, super obsessed with the story of Psyche and Cupid, and in it, there's 3 sisters, and, like, I feel like this myth is part of where, like, the Cinderella evil sisters come from because in the story, Psyche's sisters are awful. They're terrible. So I'm like, "Ooh, there's like maybe that's more of like the maybe the other side of the lower aspects or however you want to I don't hate talking about the duality stuff, but like, the some of the other aspects of sisterhood that are less about empowering each other and supporting and nurturing each other, which I feel like you were talking to a bit, Hoda. But yeah, but let's just think about the sisters thing for a second before we switch. Anything else coming up with yeah, for me, like and I never had a sister. I wish I had. I just had a brother. But I remember when we were having kids, I really wanted us to have a daughter first if we were gonna have multiple kids. We only end up having one. Because I was like, man, a big sister. Like I had met guys who had big sisters, and they were so much different than my guy friends that had younger sisters or no sisters. They were just always felt more like I don't know, just more like fully fleshed human beings. It's not to diss my friends or myself, but that's the best way I can put it. Um, Cody says, "I have so many sisters." How many sisters are we talking here? 5. Okay, no wonder this is a theme that is present for you. And 1 brother. Interesting. Like, I bet that brother, like I don't know, I don't wanna make any assumptions, but I would imagine they have benefited immensely. And I just spent the weekend with them. Yeah, so I can understand why sisterhood might be on your in your field. That's funny. That's cute. Um, yeah, but sister yeah, so, like, what I don't know, hold on, I feel like I'm putting you on the spot, and I'm sorry. Lexi, if you have any sisters, please chime in. I'm a little I can't speak from personal experience, but, like, what what has having all those sisters in your life, like, what do you feel like that might be have taught you? I know that's a really hard deep question. So maybe I'm trying to get better at asking smaller questions. Yes. Yes. Mostly that the goddess has many faces and forms and expression. I I love how you say this. I mean, there's like I've been playing around with this sort of like sometimes I use this phrase or whatever, this sort of concept, this idea in my own inner work of like the goddess with infinite aspects. Um, and I do think you're right that like there is something about the goddess, about feminine energy that is so multifaceted in a way that is very different than the different aspects of more masculine energy, at least for me, in my experience. Yeah, like, I know with a lot of, like, tradition, like, when you do, like, a lot of, like, divine masculine, divine feminine stuff, like, all the different groups are always trying to break shit down into, like, the smallest pieces, and I know that there's a lot on, like, the idea of, like, the maiden, um what is it? Oh gosh, I'm blanking on the middle one now. It's the maiden, the something, and the crone, right? Um, but I feel like there's no way you can break down those feminine into, like there's just so many. That's why I love these traditions and so many goddesses, because it's like, yeah, reality is complex. Maiden mother, thank you, is the mother. How could I forget mother? It's like one of the first archetypes we talked about is. But like, yeah, like I get why like maiden mother crone is like a helpful kind of reduction, and like I think there's some usefulness there, but like wow. Wow, is there so many more aspects within that framework? Like that's just yeah, that's way too simplified. Actually, I would say that the maiden, sort of like the virgin, has been in my field too, because I feel like that the more that I've been playing with this story of Psyche and Cupid, the more that it has come up in my field. Like I keep going like, what is this saying? Because Psyche in Greek is like where we get the term psyche in psychology, but also was really a word that meant soul. And I was trying to think. Okay, so maybe I'll just go for it. Well, I don't blame you. So what it says I haven't watched the video. So I was like looking for. I've watched so many YouTube videos of the story of Psyche and Cupid, and I thought they were all interesting and I loved it, but they all were different a little bit. And I was like, all right, well, where's the text? Like, maybe this is part of like an egregore that I have to fight back against because when I came back to Christianity, like so much of Protestant forms of Christianity is like go to the text, the scripture, right? And so like that's what I'm used to. Like I want to go into the scripture and like to use my language before, like I want to let this dream speak for itself. Like I don't want to add other things that aren't in the text or aren't in the story. So I ended up going to find at my local bookstore a copy of The Golden Ass, which originally was called Metamorphoses or Changes by Alpius. And it's like the first, or it's the only extant book novel that we have in Latin. So it's like the oldest copy of this. And the story, they, according to what I've read, so that novel was like published or whatever, or was available in like the second century AD. But there's archaeology that shows that they think this story is probably more like from the fourth century BC. So oral story, and then this book is the first time someone put it to pen. And it takes place in a pretty bawdy book. Like it's a fun book. I haven't finished it, but it's about this guy who is obsessed with magic and he's extremely curious about it. And then he goes to Thessaly, which he and like the tradition of the time is like the center of magic where they're from. And he turns out that where he's staying, the wife of the person who is a witch, and she has like all this master of witchcraft, and everyone's telling him to stay away from her, and he's like, "Oh, I want more!" Like he's so obsessed with it, and he has a love affair with this servant, and he's watching her do it. He says, "Please help me, like see her do some magic," and so he watches her as she does this ritual and puts this ointment on her, and she turns into an owl. And he's like, dude, I want to turn into a bird. So he says, Fotis, help me out. This is and he rubs this ointment all over himself. He's so excited. And instead of turning into a donkey. And then just as she's like maybe trying to help him figure out how to reverse the spell, you have to eat these roses that have been sort of that are connected to Venus. Um, but before he has any chance to do it, these robbers come in and they steal everything in the house, including the donkey, his horse and the donkey. And so now he goes on all these misadventures, and he's like stuck in this cave with the robbers. And this woman is terrified. She was like kidnapped for ransom, and this old woman is like trying to make her feel better, and she tells the story of Psyche and Cupid. So that's like the background, and I didn't mean to go so long with that, but I think it's interesting that that's how it shows up for the first time. Let me retell this old ancient story. And I have not practiced trying to tell this in my own words, so uh, I'm just gonna go for it without a whole lot of practice. But I feel like I've listened and read this thing so many times. But yeah, but I think I went all this long way to say like I understand why Hoda hasn't listened to it, because I didn't know it was that long. Like it's like the biggest huge part of this book, but I read it and I read pretty quick. But the dang video is still like 90 minutes. So I understand why, yeah, watching 15-minute videos. So I'm gonna try to do like my like 5 or 10 minute version of this story. But when I read from the book, it's almost 90 minutes. So I get why. Um, but okay, the short version is this king has 3 daughters. And 2 of the daughters are lovely, they're beautiful. But this third daughter is like a whole other level of radiance. People are obsessed with her. And like to the point where they actually think she is the new Venus. Like the text says, sort of like, I have a quote here: Venus had had a second birth, this time from earth, not water. A Venus endowed with the flower of virginity and germinated from a distillation of stars. So word of this woman travels everywhere. Like they're like, what? You got to see this woman, Psyche. She's not even a woman. She's a girl. Honestly, in the text, she's like, they don't give her age, but archetypally, if we're just gonna stick with the dream, we can think of her as really like a late teenager, probably. But she's beautiful, radiantly beautiful. Um, and there's an innocence about her, and everyone thinks she's basically Venus, like the second coming of Venus, to the point where instead of garlanding statues of Venus and doing all the rites for Venus, they're doing it for her. She's getting garlands in the street and all the sprays, and everyone's worshiping her, um, as if she were Venus. And this is not great for Psyche for a couple of reasons. One reason is her sisters get married off to kings in foreign lands, but no one is marrying Psyche because she's almost like a goddess to them. None of the men, no one wants to approach her like as like a dater or court her. They're like, no, she's like Venus, right? So she's like, this kind of sucks. And meanwhile, Venus is pissed. The actual Venus from the heavens is like, who the hell is this bitch? Like, and pretty much saying it in those terms. Like the language is funny in the book. So Venus is pissed. She's like, who is this? At one point, she even says here, I have it written here. I, the primal mother of all living, I, the elemental source of energy, I, the fostering Venus of the girdled earth, I am degraded to sharing my empire and honor with a mere wench. My name engraved on the heaven is defiled by the excrement. Like, damn, she is not happy about it at all. So she's like, I gotta do something about this. I gotta take this chick out. I'm not feeling it. And so she calls her son, the god of love, desire. And she's like, I need you to take care of this. To strike your arrow in a way so that Psyche falls madly in someone who's like barely the and so use your arrow. And so back to the king, like he doesn't daughter. Oh, the audio cut. Oh, thank you. Which part? Okay, let me know when I'm back. Okay, back now. Um, so I think I got to the point where like Venus is asking Cupid to have her fall madly in love, using his arrow to fall madly in love with like the monster, with this treacherous, disgusting creature of a man, right? That's what she asks Cupid to do. And meanwhile, the king is like, "What am I gonna do?" He's like, I really want to help her get married. So he goes to the oracle of Apollo, and he's like, "What do I do?" And it's quite terrible, right? This is an oracle of Apollo, and I actually do have the quote here, and he gives her the instruction, like, "Here's what you do to take care of this." But it's not. The king is just crestfallen when he hears it. King, stand the girl upon some mountaintop, adorned in fullest mourning. No mortal husband, king, shall make no her crop. It is a raging serpent she must wed, which, flying high, universe, debilitating all Jove, gods all scream, and this so like referencing the river Styx, and which is one of the rivers that flows in the underworld. So basically, she's like, yeah, the oracle's like, put her up on the mountain so she can get wed to her betrothed serpent. And the king's like, shit, what? But he's not going to defy the gods. And no one is. And so this is what they do. They bring her up to the mountaintop, and it's like a funeral procession. And they're all distraught and sad and crying. And Psyche's like, why are you crying now? You all should have cried when everyone was treating me like the second coming of Venus. That's when my fate was sealed. I can see now clearly she's my murderess. Like, she can feel it, And she's like, now I'm happy that there's a relief. Like, let's just do this. So Psyche's, accepts her fate. And she's like, stop crying. Like, I've been doomed this whole time. So let's just do this. Um, and so she does it, and they leave her up to a mountaintop. And Zephyrus, the god of the west wind, carries her off the mountain. And she wakes up, and she actually wakes up in this gorgeous, godly mansion. It's beautiful. There's gardens, there's flowers everywhere. It's like a gorgeous castle just filled with, this, like they describe it like these beautiful sculptures of silver, and it's beautiful. And she has like full access. She's walking around and looking at everything. And suddenly she hears voices. And these voices are like, "We're your attendant. Why don't you go get some rest and then wake up and we'll make you an amazing meal." She's like, "Okay." So she gets some sleep. She wakes up and the voice is, "Okay, we've got this plate for you." And suddenly this table is being filled with food beyond food. Meanwhile, there's no one around. So it's these like invisible servants waiting on hand and foot. And suddenly lyre playing and beautiful choir. She's in this gorgeous heavenly mansion. She's alone, but she's filled with all these voices. And at night, she's going to bed and she feels the presence of the bridegroom coming. And she's a little bit scared. She's not sure. They don't go into much detail in the story of what the interaction's like, but he consummates the wedding, right? And she loses her virginity. And before the sun comes up, he's gone, and we don't see him. And so we don't know kind of what he looks like, right? And so eventually this goes on, right? And she lives this life, um, and then one night the bridegroom comes and he says, "Listen, there's trouble coming. Fortune is laying," and uses the capital F, Fortune, like the goddess Fortuna. There's something horrific coming your way, um, and it has to do with your sisters. They have heard about what happened to you, and they're resolute in trying to find you, and they're going to go up to the mountain, and you might hear their voices, and you might really feel an urge to bring them to you or to tell them where you are, but don't do it. Don't do it. And Psyche's like, "What?" And now she's inconsolable. She's like, "But my sisters are despondent and I can't even give them reassurances. I don't even have humans to interact with during the day. And then I see at night only, and I don't see who you are." And she's like, "Please." And she kind of wears him down. And he's like, "All right, do as you desire." And ISO. But he said, but please do this. Just don't say anything about my identity. Don't give them a foothold there. And you can ply them with whatever gold and stuff you want. Like tell them to leave with the gold, but don't tell them anything about about my identity. So she finally kind of they go back and forth. He's like, fine, but please don't do that. And so she follows this out, right? And she doesn't tell them about the identity. Um, but they start to figure out something's not right, and they get jealous. They're super envious. They're like, "How could this happen? She's our youngest sister, and now she lives like this lordly, godly life. Like, what's going on here? Like, this can't stand." Um, and so this kind of happens again, right? The same issue happens where she hears their voice. It does sound a lot like Cinderella, right, Hoda? Yes, they're madly jealous. And um, so this kind of goes on, and then, what happens is they want to come back, right? And the same kind of concept comes in. He says the same thing, like, "Do not reveal anything to them." Like, I can't possibly stress this enough. Um, he even says, like, "Or by her sacrilegious curiosity, cast herself down, exalted height of fortune, and never again enjoy his graces." But she said later, her husband felt his will reluctantly drown beneath her kisses. So, like, she keeps wearing him down. He's like, fine, just don't do anything about my identity. Like, do not give them a foothold. And so the first time she had come up with a lie and said, "Oh, he's this really cute, handsome man. He's young. He barely has a beard." She gives him that. The second time they catch her off guard, and she's not ready, and she accidentally forgets and tells him something different. "Oh, yeah, he's this middle-aged guy, blah blah blah." And so the sisters get back and they're like, "This chick is lying to us. Does she think we're idiots? Clearly, she must be married to a god, and she's holding this back on us, and she's not telling us." He's like, and so they come up with a plot to take her down, and they say, "Okay, let's handle this." And so this sort of happens where the sisters reach out to her again, and he brings them in, and she brings them in. She tells the west wind to bring them, and they do. And they tell her, like, listen, the reason why you can't find out your husband's identity, is like, we know you don't know what they look like. It's because he's a serpent. He's a monster. You're married to a monster. And and she said, "We're your sisters. We would never do anything to you that wasn't true. We have your best interests at heart." And so this thought really takes a foothold in Psyche, and she begins to believe it. She says, "Oh my God, I must be married to a monster." And they said, "Don't worry, sister, we'll help you out. We've already come up with a plan for you. You're going to hide a lamp, and you're going to hide a blade right by the bed. You're going to wait for him to fall asleep. And then when you do, you're going to take the lamp so that you can see enough in the dark, and you can take that knife, and you're going to sever his head. And then you just call us, and we'll come get you. Don't worry about it." So she's like, "Okay, I guess I'm gonna do this." So she's like ranked, and she's messed with it. It says even like the Furies, so these like Greek goddesses, or they're more like daimons, like of horrible fury. Like they're tormenting her, and she keeps kind of getting the will to do this and not getting, going back and forth. And then finally the night comes. They have their sort of their nightly I think they say amorous skirmishes, nice euphemism. They have sex. She falls asleep, and so she gets the lamp, and she puts the lamp over him. And what's funny is, and this is important for like the dream archetypal, like stay in the, he's betrayed by the lamp. So I think this is key. I'm not going to skip over this part. It's not a mistake. It says she's betrayed by the lamp to burn the very god of. It's almost like they said, like the lamp's almost like wants to kiss his body in the lamp's way. And as she gets close, I mean, sorry, so I'm skipping a little bit. First, she sees he uses the lamp to grab him. She has a knife, and she sees that it's Cupid, that it's actually the god of love. And she's like, "What? It's not a monster. It's not a serpent. My husband is Cupid. Oh my God." And she almost wants to like plunge the knife into her chest because she's like, "What have I done? How have I done to my husband who's Cupid?" And again, here, another inanimate object, the knife actually jumps out of the way, like it falls to the ground so that she can't into him. Arrow, the arrow's quiver, and goes to test the sharpness, and she pricks herself with his arrow. Now, of course, as the blood flows out of her, her desire is just maximized, and she's so in love. And she gets closer and closer with this lamp. And that's when the lamp betrays her. As she gets closer, wanting to embrace him, hot oil spills onto his shirt. And Cupid wakes up and says, "What the hell's going on here?" He sees what's going on, and he says, "Oh, now I know what happened." And he goes to fly off and grabs onto his leg to hold on to him. And he's off. He said, "No, I told you it was going to happen. I told you you would lose to the top." Psyche, like, I told you. I told you this. Why didn't you listen to me? And he explains, like, I chose rather. Oh, the audio is out again. Let me know if it comes back. So Cupid, he flies off. She tries to hold on as best she can, but eventually she falls to the earth. And he goes to the top of a tree, and he tells her, like, I chose rather to fly to you myself as a lover. I acted rashly. Well, I know. I, the world famous archer, stabbed myself with my own arrowhead. And he says, this, your sisters are going to get your comeuppance. But for me, my flight away is penalty enough. And it's true. She's totally destroyed by this. The fact that her husband flies away and it was Cupid, especially now that she's been struck by his arrow. Like, right? She's completely over the moon for him and he's gone. And he's in pain, right, from this attack. And so she goes to the river and trigger warning, she decides that she wants to just end her life here. Again, and the river stops her. The river kind of takes the waves and pushes her to the shore. The river won't let her hurt herself. And she runs into Pan, the country god as it's called. And he kind of is trying to he tries a little bit to try to help her. And he says, listen, Cupid, he's a spoiled boy. Venus's spoiled son. It's like just woo him. Woo him with your adoring prayers. That's what he wants. So she's feeling a little bit buoyed by this conversation. She's like, okay, how do I do? Um, but she also is going to get the revenge on. So she as she's walking, and again, the dream lets her do this. Like she's just walking. And when I say the dream, I think that helps it kind of us have the right approach at looking at it. So as she's walking, just walking aimlessly, looking one of the first places she goes, she ends up at one of her sister's husband's castles. And she tells her sister about it, but she says Cupid was so mad, he said he was gonna run off and fly to my sister, you, and he's going to marry you instead. She hears it. Hell yeah, I don't want this guy, my husband. He's so whack. And so she goes to the top of the mountain. She jumps off the mountain, ready for, and of course, gruesome, bloody death. And as Psyche is walking, she runs into her other sister's castle, and the same thing happens. She tells her sister the same thing. That sister does the same thing, and she dies, jumping off the mountain for her Cupid. Meanwhile, so while she's kind of walking, Venus is getting information too. A seagull comes to tell Venus about what's happening and about all the gossip that's flying because Cupid's nowhere to be found. And um, and the seagull tells her the tea. Seagull's like, the lad has been whoring in the mountain. This is what she's kind of repeating what he's hearing people say, that this lad's been whoring in the mountain while Venus has given herself up to aquatic sports. And in consequence, there's no joy, no grace, no elegance anywhere, nothing but the sick and the uncouth, no marriage bond, no social intercourse, no love of children, nothing but an utter lack of order and an unpleasant horror of anything so low as nuptials. So, like, Cupid is MIA and it's having serious ramifications on Earth without that energy present. And so now Venus is pissed. She's like, "What's going on? Why is Cupid messing with my stuff? Like, now my whole family, now people are." And she runs into Ceres and Juno, Hera, uh, and Demeter, and she's venting to them. I'm sure you've heard about all this. No, what are we gonna do? This is horrible. And they basically say like, yo, Cupid is getting older. And of course he felt why of all people, like the goddess of beauty should sort of know that inevitable. So they're trying to appease her. Oh, actually no. I love living. Oh no, the audio. Ah, testing, 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 testing. Did the audio come back? Man, and this is taking much longer than I expected also. So I feel this is interesting. Let me know if the audio comes back. Let me know once it's back. Yeah, I have a lot of editing to do. Let me know as the audio return. Thank you. So I'm not sure where I left off, but the seagull's giving Venus the tea, and Venus is like, "Who? What's this girl's name? Like, who is she shacked up with in the woods?" And he said, "Oh, I think her name was Psyche." She said, "What? Psyche? My slave girl? Psyche?" So she's pissed. She's even more pissed, and this is when she's going to Ceres and Juno and complaining to them. And they're like, "Listen, she's a beautiful girl, and Cupid came of age. Like, what's the big deal?" But Venus won't have it, and she's pissed, right? And Psyche is just walking and walking, and she ends up at the temple of Ceres, and she talks to her. And Ceres like, listen, I'd love to help you, but I can't actually. I'm kind of bound by my bonds of sisterhood with Venus. I can't possibly help you. I would love to, but I can't. In fact, I'm actually helping you by not holding. So she goes distraught that Ceres won't help her. She ends up at Juno's temple and is trying to kind of appease Juno. Juno says the same thing, like, I would love to help you, but I can't. Like, I'm tied to a bond to Venus. Like, no. So now she's like, you know what? I guess I have no choice but to just face the music. So she decides to just go to Venus. She's like, maybe I can just sort of wear her hate me as bad as I think. So she goes to Venus's temple, and Venus, of course, treats her horribly. She torments her, and she said, "All right, I'm gonna really test what is this love like." And she's really trying to lay it out, think like Cupid is at death's door. He's done for because of what you've done. Um, and so she gives him these trials. There's four tests that she gives him. The first is she mixes all these seeds up, all these different kinds of seeds, and she's like, "I need you to mix this promiscuous pile of seeds." Right? And so she's just like staring at this pile, like, I'm never gonna be able to do this mess. I'm done. And an aunt sees her and feels bad for her, and also feels like the her mother-in-law is quite mean. So the aunt gets all of his friends. He rallies his, and they help sort all this. And she gets back and she's pissed. She's like, "You made Cupid do this, didn't you?" She's like, "You're gonna pay for this." And there's some more torture, and then she says, "Okay, fine. You know what? I got another thing for you. There's some sheep with golden fleeces out there. I need you to collect their fleece for me." So she's walking out there and she's, "Oh, this isn't going to be too bad." But a gentle reed from the river speaks to her and says, "Yeah, those sheep are crazy. Like, you're going to get killed if you try to take their fleece." He's like, "But I'll help you out." He said, "Wait until the hot sun kind of cools. They take a little bit of a nap and then go and collect their fleece because they're running up against all these briars. It gets caught up in the bushes, so you can just pull it from." And so she does that, and she brings back the fleece. And again, Venus is pissed. She's like, "I'm not sure how you're doing this, but I know that there's tricks at foot. I know you're not actually doing this yourself." So she's like, "All right, get him. I need you to, since you're so kind of, dead set on my son, go get some spring water from the top of that mountain that goes all the way to the river. It's like the spring water on top of the mountain that down the underworld. The river Styx." And so she said, "Go get it." So she's like, "Okay." And she goes there, and once again, she's totally distraught. Like, oh, this is never gonna happen. There's boulders. It's like this treacherous climb, and there's dragons literally all the way up. So like she's like, there's no way this is gonna happen. And she's once again ready to like just call it quits. And she says that she's so like she's totally distraught. But then there's this phrase I love. But the agony of the innocent soul is apparent to the mastering eyes of providence. And so in this case, the mastering eyes of providence is sort of the archetype in this dream is Jupiter. And in this case, the royal bird of Jupiter, the eagle, comes in and he decides to help. He said, this is quite a mess you've gotten into, but I'll help you. And he goes up to the top and he flies up and he gets some of the river water at the top and he brings it to her. And so she's very thankful for the eagle. She brings it to Venus and once again being pissed. And she's like, okay, final test time. This is the final test is she has to go to hell. She has to go to the underworld. And I need you, I have this box for you. Give it to Proserpine. So this is the sort of Roman equivalent of Persephone. And I need you to request, quote, a scrap of her beauty for Venus, which has been wasted away because I've been caring for. So she's like, go to hell. Like, how am I going to do this? How am I going to get to the. She's like, I guess I'll just jump off a damn tower. Like, that seems like the fastest way. She's like, this is crazy. And the tower stops her. So again, in the dream, the tower says, don't do this. If you do it this way, yes, you'll go to Hades, but you won't come back. You won't be able to travel back from Pluto, to use the Roman language. So he gives her all these really detailed instructions about how to pay the ferryman and about how to have these sops of butter, this like this bread that's soaked in honey wine of her hands, and she has to keep the gold coins too, one for the each way back, because he says there's greed in the underworld. You can't do that there too. And he says there's going to be a ton of people. Venus has a ton of traps laid for you to try to get. Do not do it because the sops are the three-headed dog. You need two sops to give it to ply him. And so she follows the instructions of the tower. She ignores all these distractions, and she actually gets to Proserpine agrees and gives her a little beauty. And so she takes the box. And the most important thing the tower had told Psyche was, do not open that box. Do not let anyone get anything in your way to get it. Don't take luxury at the table and just eat scrap of bread from Proserpine. And do not open this box. So she makes her way out of hell. She goes across, pays Charon, the ferryman. She gets across the river Styx. She ends up back on Earth. But then that curiosity of hers reaches into her, and that desire from the prick of Cupid. She said, but if even just a little bit of beauty can come to me from this box, then even more likely that my husband will forgive me and that I'll be back into his braces. And she succumbs to this curiosity in the box. And inside the box is not some gorgeous beauty. It's like this darkness, this night of Styx, the sleep of the innermost darkness, it's called. And she falls into a deep sleep and she dies. She's dead. Meanwhile, Cupid is kind of finally healed. He goes back up and he goes to look for her and he realizes what has happened. And thankfully, he finds her and he's able to find her and he's able to put the innermost sleep back in the box and he brings her back with the prick of his arrow again. Boom, a little prick again. And he says, I love this. Look now, again, you've ruined yourself by your uncontrollable curiosity. And so he says, go back, bring the box to Venus, and let me handle the rest. So she does. She goes back to Venus. And meanwhile, he goes to himself. And he says, please, this has gone on long enough. Like, help me out of this. Like, please help Psyche through this. And so he hears the case, and Jupiter agrees. And first he gives Cupid some shit because he's like, yo, you've gotten me in so much trouble. Um, yes, enough is enough, Hoda. Exactly. But Jupiter gives him some shit like, yo, you're out here, like I'm trying to lay down the law and order. And meanwhile, because of you, Cupid, I'm getting infatuated with all kinds of human girls, goddesses, and causing all kinds of trouble, right? Like he's basically blaming his whoring on Cupid here, but he still loves the boy. Like he says, I weaned you myself too. So he says, I'll agree to this. I'll help you with this. I'll take care of this. Don't worry. But then after he said all that, Jupiter, the dog is still in this guy. He's still like, but because I'm helping you, if I do see a particularly beautiful woman, you'll help me, right? It's like, damn, Jupiter, really? Anyway, he agrees. Jupiter calls all the gods to the court. He says, listen here. This is what's happening. It's time for Cupid to get married. Cupid needs to settle down. It's time. It's good for everyone. He almost is starting to like couch it as like this is good for the order of things that Cupid has come of age and it's time to settle down. And yeah, exactly. Jupiter said, "I need my cut." Like, yo, hook a brother up though. Um, but so Jupiter says, "Listen, Cupid's gonna get down. It's time to fetter this reckless boy of a god, and we're gonna get him married. And he's picked someone. Like, so let him have his Psyche. And in order for this to go down, they have Mercury come. Um, and Mercury was in the story earlier. Venus had asked Mercury to tell everyone like, "Hey, I'll give you this huge prize if you find my Psyche." And so this time Mercury is bringing everyone together for the opposite. Get everyone together, and Jupiter says, "Bring Psyche to me." Okay, and he gives Psyche, and so now Psyche becomes a god. She becomes a goddess, an immortal, and there's a huge marriage, and all seems to be right. Finally, for things, even Venus is like dancing at this wedding. Everyone's at this wedding. It's a huge deal, and then the story ends. And I think that it's a really important piece that once they end up having a daughter who is named Joy. Right. So the end of this dream is that Soul and Desire are married, and in that, joy comes into the world. So that's the story. That's the myth. That's the dream. And I went longer than I meant to. I see it's 4:30, but I want to leave time to just get any reflections from people um, about it because this story has been doing so much work in me. Like I don't even know why why it's like animated me in a way, but it has. But I'm just kind of curious, like if anything stands out to you all about this particular myth or these characters or this sort of archetypes within this. Please cut me off. I'll start sharing a little bit. Oh, I see some typing, but I really want to hold space to hear what other people. Yeah, I feel like I might need to meditate on it. I mean, I love how I'm asking. Listen, this is my problem. I'm asking you. Meanwhile, this story has animated me, but I don't know why. It took me like I'm only now, weeks later, after recording this thing and doing the story a million times, I'm only now starting to like find words to some of the things that seem to be arising in me with this story. So I get it. I get wanting to meditate on this. I would say like one thing that's really standing out to me is like I do think this the first thing that came to me when I was listening to this story was I feel like this myth, this dream, is telling us something about the relationship between the cosmic and the earthly. So that's the first thing I'll say, and I won't say more about that yet, but that feels really present for me, right? This sort of because like so much of the central tension of this dream is that she is a physical manifestation of a goddess, or at least everyone sees her as that. Um, the second thing I will say is like why is Psyche a second coming of Venus? And to me, I think a lot has to do with her innocence. The dream stresses her virginity a lot. It also stresses her curiosity. Um, and like Pan even says, like, you don't know the ways of the world. Like there's this innocent curiosity that is a core part of Psyche's character. And I find it interesting that that person is seen as this radiant beauty. So I think there's something being said about the radiant beauty of innocence. Um, and then who is it that helps that is like breaking this innocence? In that breaking, but like, deflowering, literally, like in the archetypal language. Like the marriage is consummated. She's no longer a virgin to desire, to love itself, to Cupid, to however you want to articulate what that archetype is. And I think that's probably one of the keys to this story is really trying to figure out what Cupid or who Cupid is. But that's what takes this innocence away is desire. Um, it is deeply symbolic. Thank you for saying that, Hoda. I also like I can't help maybe this is my Christian lineage. I can't help but see a lot of parallels with Adam and Eve. And I also find it very interesting that the oracle says that she's going to be married to a serpent. And and the way that the other gods talk about it, they're afraid of him. Like he's this boy and he's spoiled. Like they use that language, but they're afraid of Cupid because of how powerful he is. Because once that arrow has pricked you, you lose control. And so the gods are afraid of Cupid too. They even say like when Ceres and Juno are like trying to appease Venus, like they're taking Cupid's case, but it even says it like they're kind of taking his case because they're afraid of him too. Like they want to be on Cupid's good graces because Cupid's messing up their marriages and like he's powerful. And so yes, the serpent, like it feels really like they never give Cupid any serpentine qualities, but I find that very interesting and it feels really related to other things that come later. Uh in the West, right, with Christianity kind of replacing the ancient Greek religion, which becomes the ancient Roman religion eventually, right? Like, there's something interesting there. So I don't know. I won't say more there, I guess, but I find it interesting that her innocence, her virginity is deflowered by desire, by this sort of amorous, intoxicated love. The way that they speak of the flame of love and the way that they speak of this arrow and sort of all the joy it brings, as you said, when Cupid's out of command life is good, but all the trouble too. Like it's this wonderful. There's a lot that seems to be wrapped up in this Cupid archetype. Interesting archetypes that are supporting her in this journey. Um, even as she continues to sort of like want to give up, she can't see a way out. But that something about her innocence, something about her, the way that like she really, I mean, none of this, she didn't bring any of this on. Like she did nothing but like that's the other thing that really stood out to me about this Psyche. I just really loved her for some reason because like woman didn't do anything. Like she just literally existed. And now all these forces of the heavens, of the earth, like she's thrust into this into like trial and tribulation for like for what? For existing and being radiantly, innocently beautiful. Like dang, that's rough. But then if she's a stand-in for humanity, psyche, that's an interesting thing, right? Where we come to this earth shrouded in ignorance. And there used to be this idea of like the blank slate, which I do not believe in. But it's sort of like there's something interesting there, maybe, of this archetype of there's an innocence within a human that within a new human being in an incarnation, a new psyche that quickly gets taken over by a desire, by forces greater than them. And I do think there's something there in this story too. And I'm not sure what exactly. I'm not really. I'm trying to like to limit myself because I want whatever to come out to be more true. But those are the things I've been wrestling with this story. And yeah, I just want to open it up before we close out and just sort of see if any of those things feel resonant or yeah. I'm also curious, like another maybe an easier question is what feels most salient? Like what like really stood out piece? I'm curious what jumped out at you because that can be really fruitful. And what I just shared about like her innocence and like her just being like, just existing and getting hit with all this, that was like the first thing that was really salient for me. Ooh, now I love this. Hoda says, I guess for me, the marriage between logos and the heart stands out for me. Mm, yeah, I'm wondering like if you were to kind of call out what feels like archetypal resonances around logos versus what feels like archetypes or themes or characters that feel more like heart in this myth, I'd love to hear it. Like when you think of like logos and heart and this marriage, like who's who in that? Ah, she said, yes, her innocence to me almost mirrors how I see Earth sometimes. Now that, wow, yes. Mm, yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And I will say the other one of the other things that really caught was it that as part of this, she had to travel to the underworld and she dies. Like that seems critical, this sort of underworld visit, this descent, this ascent, this death, this rebirth, um, this transfiguration. They all feel pretty vital. She said, yeah, to me, Cupid is kind of standing for heart in the text, and Psyche as logos for the heart. Ooh, gosh, I'm really appreciating this, but I need to be honest. I logos is one of those terms, those words that I still am like working on because the first time I really gave weight to logos was in the Christian context, in the Gospel of John, right? That was that wor that start, John 1, is still one of the things I come back to the most. That starts like, "In the beginning was the Logos, and the Logos was with God, and the Logos was God," which most translations call the and so that sort of Christological version of the Logos is, like, still one that's so present, so it's always hard for me to distance myself with that, but I think I see what you're saying here, um, and, like, I also always, like, tend to, like, back of the envelope translate logos sometimes to, like, real being, but I feel like that's not really the way that I often hear everyone in the Broom and the Pod talk about logos, so I'm wondering and hold on, I'm really sorry, I keep putting you on the spot. You don't have to do this, but if you wanna say more about kind of what what you see as logos, that I would love to hear it because I feel like I'm not the only one that might have yeah, kind of maybe just, different perspectives on logos could be really fruitful. Mm. She says, I'd say maybe it relates to the rising primal gnosis." Whoa, okay, I'm getting some interesting Mm, mhm. Wow. In that sense that it springs out of us spontaneously, which to me kind of relates to how Psyche's curiosity takes yeah, when you said that, like, oh, wow. Yes. Where it's like, when the knife betrays her, when the lamp does what the lamp does, when the reed does what the reed does, and the river, and the tower, and the ant. It's an interesting thing to be like, what is really happening there? And I feel like I love how you're at least this is the way I'm feeling what you're saying is sort of like that those archetypes are drawing us to like this sort of primal gnosis that's coming from reality itself, where she's getting messages from the things around her, from the earth. Um, yeah, wow. And again, this feels kind of like related. Again, maybe I'm just because of my namesake. Like it does feel like I'm thinking of Adam, where it says he names the animals, and every time I've gone in and meditated on that, I've been more convinced of some of like the Vedic and other teachings where it's like it's not necessarily that Adam came up with the names. It's more like there's this primal gnosis, like he learned the names. They told him what their names were, and he said them out loud, and that was naming them. But it wasn't like he came up with names like that looks like, panther. Like, no, these things were telling them what they were, and he was translating it into human language. But they already had an essence, and so then they were just relaying it and he communicating it in language. So to me, it feels like, yeah, like Psyche is getting valuable information from the landscape, from the earth. Hoda says, yes. Um, I don't know if I read this already, but I want to read it again. In the sense that it springs out of us spontaneously, which to me kind of relates to how Psyche's curiosity takes shape in the story. Yes, that's true. She's curious and then she's getting responses and she's interpreting them as, something else, but like in the dream. But it's coming, right? She's tapping into this intelligence and they're helping her do everything. And absolutely, Hoda says Adam's tasked with naming what happens within the container of his interaction with nature. Ooh, Adam's tasked with naming what happens within the container of his interaction with nature. Yes, they already have a language. The environment is speaking to her directly. Yeah, thank you. That I feel like this is adding in some pieces that were not were not really fully there for me. Wow. Yeah, the rising of primal gnosis. Yes. And it's so fascinating that this goddess, this term psyche, became like the root of like modern psychology, right? Um, interesting. Yes. Okay. I'm like just letting that sit within my own self for sure. Letting this new insight um do its work. Thank you for sharing that. Yeah. And so if I were to go back to like this idea of like logos and the heart. Yeah. I'm like trying not to take things literally here, but like I am just really sitting with like this relationship between curiosity and logos. And again, I do see Psyche as kind of a stand-in for human. That's why I think I see her as like an Adam and Eve type of a figure for some reason. Like I do like clearly there's other humans in this myth. Like she's not ever said that she's like a first human, but it feels like the birth of something. And I like how you said the rising of like it does feel like this myth is pointing us to maybe like an evolution of humanity and human consciousness. Um, and so that's why I think I just keep being drawn to this because I feel like it's an initiation. I really do. Actually, that's the first time I've said that, but I'm saying it out loud and it's feeling more true than I had thought. That the reason this thing is animating me is this story off. Hmm, hmm. Well, I am seeing the time and I want to be mindful. I don't want to go on crazy long. But I'm just gonna sit with that, and I'm really invite anyone who might have listened to this to kind of share what might have come up for you. If anything stood out, and then obviously I started a thread in I think it's under the Archetypal Hour, but if you do a quick search for Psyche and Cupid, you'll find it. And I'd love to hear so we can continue the conversation there as well and see what comes up for people. I'm hoping someone else catches this bug. Although I apologize because it is. I feel like it is an issue. Maybe I should wish it upon other people and just sort of let things go and put it out there in the ether who at- might attract to it. But thank you, Lexi Hoda, for making this space so full with your thoughts and insights and energies. Um, yeah, and I'll have to do some editing. Hopefully, when those hearing it won't hear the huge gaps of audio breakdowns, but I'm really thankful for anyone that stuck around and listened to it. Um, yeah. All right. Have a great rest of your week.